They called her ugly and she was always humiliated. She was given by her own father to an Apache warrior, but he loved her like no white man ever had. What no one expected was what she discovered in the village, a stunning discovery that changed everything and revealed a betrayal that shook two families. The bells of the small church in San Dolores always rang twice a day, in the morning to announce life, and at sunset to remember that all things pass. The town, forgotten between the dry mountains and the whistling northern wind, was the kind of place where time didn't change, and neither did the people. The women wore long skirts, washed clothes on the river stones, and whispered about anything that was strange, different, or ugly. Camila grew up in this setting, the daughter of the powerful landowner Don Ezekiel Montemayor, lord of the lands and the fears. She was the eldest of 3 sisters. While the others, Maria and Isabella, inherited their mother's golden hair and the light eyes that charmed the town's young men, Camila seemed made of different clay. Her hair was black as coal, her deep eyes held an uncomfortable intensity, and her dark skin didn't shine in the sun, it simply existed, uninvited. From a young age, she heard that her beauty was on the inside, but no one seemed willing to look inside, not the church gossips, not the young men of the town, and least of all her own father, who only saw her as a problem to be solved, a piece off the board. Camila was quiet but not submissive. She sewed with perfection, sang to herself while sweeping the stone patio, and dreamed of things she dared not say aloud. Sometimes, when the sky turned pink before nightfall, she imagined being taken away from there, not as a bride or a prize, but as a loved, chosen woman. But no one chose Camila. That was when a messenger of war arrived in the town. The Apache tribes living beyond the mountains proposed a peace treaty with the white settlers, divided lands, exchanged horses, and a bride, a symbol of the alliance. The one chosen by the Apaches was Neuel, a silent warrior with piercing eyes and an imposing stature. He accepted the treaty but demanded a wife from the town. The father hesitated, the men of the council looked at each other, and Don Ezekiel, with a cold smile and dry eyes, stood up. "I have a daughter who can seal this peace." Camila heard those words from behind the half-open door. She felt the world silently collapse. Her head spun, her soul froze. When she entered the room, her father didn't even look at her. "It is for the good of the town," he said. That night, Camila didn't cry. She just sat in front of the cracked mirror in her room and watched herself, touching her own face as if trying to understand the reason for her own destiny. Was she ugly? Was she strange? Or was she simply herself? 2 weeks later, the town gathered in the plaza for the handover ceremony. The bells rang, but only once. Everyone's eyes followed her, some with pity, others with relief. After all, it wouldn't be one of the pretty ones who would leave. Camila wore a simple beige dress, embroidered by her own hands. On her head was a single red flower, the only bold statement she allowed herself. She walked with her head held high, though her heart weighed like lead. Neuel was there, mounted on a brown horse, silent and imposing. His gaze showed no judgment or interest, only an ancient calm, like someone who has seen more than they should. When Camila stopped in front of him, no one breathed. They expected a gesture, a rejection perhaps, but he dismounted, looked her in the eyes, and nodded slightly. He accepted her. And in that instant, in silence, without promises or kisses, Camila departed with a strange man towards Apache territory, taken not as a woman but as a currency of exchange. She looked back one last time. No one was crying. No one was waving. It was as if, for the town, she were already dead. The journey lasted 3 days and 2 nights, crossing dry valleys, dusty trails, and hills that seemed to hold ancient secrets. Camila rode in silence, unsure if she was crying for what she was leaving behind or for what she would find. The sound of Neuel's horse's hooves was the only music on that hard road. He didn't speak, only looked at the horizon as if carrying centuries on his shoulders. When they stopped to sleep, he set up the shelter with firm, careful hands. He never invaded her space, never touched her unnecessarily. Camila was surprised by this. She had expected coldness, perhaps cruelty, but found respectful distance. The cold of the nights cut to the bone. Camila would huddle under the poncho he had left by the fire without a word. Sometimes the wind blew hard, making the tree branches moan like ghosts. She would tremble but not ask for help. Neuel just kept his eyes open, protecting, silent, always. On the third day, they reached the Apache territory. It was a simple village surrounded by red mountains and fields of cacti. Children ran between the tents, women gathered herbs and washed clothes in clay pots. Everything was different. Everything smelled of earth, smoke, something ancient and pure. Camila dismounted, her legs trembling, her heart beating hard in her chest like a war drum. Neuel led her to the center of the village. Everyone looked at her, not with anger, not with contempt, but with a silent, deep curiosity, as if trying to decipher who she was on the inside, not the outside. The village shaman appeared, covered in hides and bone necklaces. He spoke in Apache, then translated into Spanish with a heavy accent. May the new flower be received with respect. May the union bring peace to the wounded land. Camila could barely breathe. She hoped someone would say it was a mistake, that she could go back, that it was all a misunderstanding. But no one did. She looked at Neuel. He extended his hand, firm and open. She hesitated, then touched his palm with her fingertips. And so the marriage was sealed, without kisses, without rings, without a veil. Only the silence between two worlds. In the following days, Camila felt the weight of the handover. The tent where she now lived was simple, made of hides and woven branches. There were straw mats, a jar of water, and a thick blanket. She spent her mornings sitting at the entrance, watching the sun rise slowly. The women watched her from a distance, some tried to smile, others murmured among themselves. Camila felt like a thorn among flowers. Her father's words returned every night like daggers, no one will mourn your absence. But there was something that confused her, Neuel. He would leave early and return at sunset, bringing roots, fruits, and carved objects. He never demanded anything. Sometimes he left things near her, a necklace of seeds, a drawing on wood. Gesture by gesture, he was breaking down her defenses, but Camila didn't know how to deal with it. This wasn't hatred, it was care. And for her, care hurt more than rejection. One night, she asked, "Why didn't you reject me, as others would?" He answered without hesitation, his voice deep like distant thunder, "Because I do not see with the eyes of the white men." She turned her face, trying to hold back tears, her chest tight, her throat dry. She didn't know if that was a comfort or a punishment. She only knew that for the first time, someone saw her whole. But it was still too soon to trust. Camila's wounded heart did not yet know that true love sometimes begins in silence. The dawn was barely creeping in when Camila carefully pushed aside the hide covering the entrance to the tent. The cold burned her skin like invisible ice, and the silence of the village was so thick it hurt her ears. Each step on the damp earth was a plea for freedom. She wasn't fleeing from Neuel, she was fleeing from what he awoke in her, a silent tenderness that disarmed her, a gaze that saw her too clearly. Camila's heart raced. She didn't know exactly where she was going, only that she needed to get out, to breathe far from this world that seemed to want to embrace her when she still felt made to be rejected. She walked for hours. The sun had not yet risen when the stones began to hurt her feet. She climbed a narrow path between the mountains, without direction, without the courage to look back. The landscape was raw, red rocks, dry bushes, crows tearing the sky with their ominous cries. Everything in her screamed with fear, but she kept going until the world spun. She tripped on a root, fell to her side, and hit her head on a stone. The sound was dull, the sky darkened in an instant, though it was already dark, and she fainted. When she opened her eyes hours later, she didn't know where she was. She only saw shadows and felt something warm on her forehead. It was Neuel's hand. He was there, sitting beside her, his eyes fixed on her, without pretense, without reproach. Camila tried to pull away, but her body wouldn't respond. A sharp pain ran through her head. "Why?" she murmured weakly. "Because you are my responsibility," he said in a firm voice. But it was more than that. She felt it. There was something in his gaze, a mixture of restrained anger and true care. He wrapped her in a thick blanket, placed her on his horse, and took her back to the village. On the way, Camila felt the warmth of his body brushing against her back and the scent of smoke and leather that enveloped him. She closed her eyes, for the first time not to escape, but to rest. In the following days, Neuel did not leave her side. He changed the cloths on her wound, prepared hot soups with bitter herbs, and whispered words in Apache that she didn't understand but that soothed her like ancient songs. The women of the village came to see her, leaving flowers, fruits, and shy smiles. Little by little, Camila felt that she wasn't just tolerated there, she was cared for, wanted. Perhaps not as a woman of visible beauty, but as a living soul. One afternoon, upon waking, she found a basket with dried barks and a small wooden sculpture beside her bed. It was a woman with her hands on her heart, and next to it, an inscription in poorly written Spanish, "Strong inside." It was from Neuel. Camila held the object with trembling hands and wept, not from pain, but from relief. For the first time, she felt she didn't have to prove anything, that she could simply be. That same night, she sat at the entrance of the tent and looked at the sky. The stars shone like ancient promises. Neuel was beside her, in silence, just breathing with her, without questions, without hurry. And in that silence, something new was born. It wasn't love yet, it was a seed. But a seed that, at the right moment, would make everything she thought she had lost forever bloom. The days in the Apache village passed with their own rhythm, guided by the dawn and the song of the birds flying over the tents. Camila, still with a fresh scar on her forehead, began to emerge from the shadow of fear. For the first time, she felt time differently, not as a prison, but as a slow dance, a dance that was beginning to teach her something new. The women of the village observed her from a distance at first, but with time, they began to approach. First, one of them, Yara, with serene eyes and skin weathered by the sun, placed a torn blanket in Camila's hands. "Do you know how to sew?" she asked. Camila didn't answer, just took the blanket, examined the fabric, and nodded slightly. That afternoon, she sat under the shade of a tree and began to sew. Her fingers rediscovered the ancient rhythm of thread and needle, but here there was no luxury, no silk, no imposition from her father. Here, her hands danced freely, creating firm stitches on rustic hides and pure fabrics. Yara returned the next day with 2 other women. Later, more came. They brought torn clothes, bags to be made, hides to be braided. Camila didn't talk much, but shy smiles began to appear. The women's eyes in the village began to see her not as an intruder, but as a sister. And in each garment she restored, Camila seemed to mend parts of herself. In the mornings, she sat with the other women, learning to dye fabrics with roots, to spin with her fingers, to braid with time. In the afternoons, she cooked corn, blew herbs into the fire, and sometimes sang an old song from her childhood, forgotten even by herself. The children began to approach, charmed by her sweet voice. One of them, small as a flower bud, took her hand and asked, "Are you a princess?" Camila laughed. For the first time in a long time, she laughed without fear. "No, little one. I am just someone who learned to stay." Neuel, as always, watched her from afar. He never invaded, never demanded, but his eyes spoke. Camila noticed when he smiled silently, seeing her being accepted. When she passed by him carrying baskets, he would simply say, "You work well." And that, coming from him, was worth more than any poem. One afternoon, when the wind blew strong and kicked up the dust, Neuel approached with a package wrapped in leather. "This is for you," he said, handing it to her with firm hands. Camila opened it carefully. Inside was a simple dress made by him, sewn by hand. It wasn't beautiful by the town standards, but it was strong, durable, and made with a visible affection. She said nothing, just held the fabric against her chest and smiled. And there, in front of that silent man, Camila understood that she was changing. Not for him, but for herself. Because something in her was beginning to flourish, something the town had trampled on, something that now breathed with dignity. She was no longer a bargaining chip, nor the forgotten daughter. She was Camila, a woman with firm hands, a soul under reconstruction, and a heart that, though still wounded, was beginning to want to beat for someone. And that someone had eyes as dark as the mountain night and the patience of time. It was a gray afternoon, rare among the scorching skies of the mountains. A soft wind blew through the village, as if nature were breathing more slowly. That day, Camila was walking between the tents, carrying a basket of scraps, when she saw a boy running towards her. "There is a gift for you," he said, panting, handing her a small rolled-up cloth. Inside was an old, rusty key. "It came with the traders from the town," the boy added. Camila recognized that key. Her heart stopped. She had seen that shape before, years ago, hanging from the neck of her father's old housekeeper. It belonged to her mother's chest, a chest that had disappeared the same day her mother was buried, many years ago. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift. Her vision blurred, but she knew what she had to do. With the elder's permission, Camila went to the small stone hut that Neuel had helped build outside the village, a shelter used to store objects from the white men that came through trade. There, among rolled-up rugs and baskets of herbs, she found the chest. It was small, made of dark wood, the lock still intact. Her hands trembled as she turned the key. The sound of the click echoed like a silent thunder inside her. Upon opening it, she smelled the ancient scent of dried flowers. Inside were letters, embroidered fabrics, and a diary. Camila sat on the packed earth floor, her heart beating like a war drum, and began to read. The handwriting was soft, round, unmistakably her mother's. The first pages spoke of her youth, of dreams of escaping the town, of hopes for a marriage of love. But then came the confession. "I loved a man before Ezekiel. A man with eyes of fire and a soul of stone. An Apache. His name was Atson. He was my secret, my escape, my sin." Camila held her breath. She continued reading. "I ran away with him for a week. I swore I would leave everything behind, but they found me. They dragged me back and told me the shame would be hidden with silence. No one would ever know. But I was pregnant. And Ezekiel agreed, for pride, for convenience." The words seemed to spit embers on her chest. "My daughter was born with dark eyes and dark skin, a mark of the blood she carried. She will never know. She can never know. It is my punishment, my forbidden love, my buried secret." Camila dropped the diary, her hands on her face. The tears came like a heavy rain, without asking permission. She screamed, alone in the hut, feeling the earth spin. She was not Ezekiel's daughter. She was the daughter of an Apache. Everything made sense, her father's rejection, her sister's contempt, the way she had always felt like a stranger in her own home. But along with the pain came panic. What if Neuel was her brother? Camila's head filled with memories, Neuel's glances, his silence, his care. Was that why? Did he know? Was he playing with her, or did he also carry that doubt? Without thinking, she ran. She reached the village crying, her legs failing, her eyes full of salt. She found Neuel alone, braiding leather in the shade of a tree. "Who am I to you?" she cried. He stood up slowly, his eyes firm but his face tense. "I read the diary," she said, holding the notebook against her chest. "My mother, my father, you, are we siblings?" Neuel didn't move. A suffocating silence fell between them until he spoke. I knew there was a story. The elders spoke of it, but I was never certain. I never knew the name. And now, she whispered, her voice broken. He approached slowly, took the diary, read a line, then another. Atson, he murmured. He was my uncle. Camila let out a forceful breath, her legs gave way. Neuel held her. You are not my sister, Camila, he said firmly. She was crying, he was holding her, and in the midst of that confusion of blood, pain, and revelations, what was born was a new feeling. Now there was no obligation, no war. There was freedom. The sky that night seemed more starry than ever, but for Camila, everything was shrouded in fog. Her head still throbbed with the words from the diary, with the name of the Apache who had been her father, with the revelation that Neuel was not her brother, but the nephew of that man lost in time. She walked aimlessly, her feet dragging through the dry earth, her eyes red from crying. In the distance, the village bonfire flickered like a heart beating in the darkness, but she didn't feel ready to return. She was stripped of everything, of the identity she thought she had, of the shame she had always carried, of the fear that had accompanied her since childhood. It was then that she heard footsteps behind her. It was Neuel. Without haste, without weapons, without a mask, he approached with the firmness of one who does not fear silence and stopped a hand's breadth away. I had my doubts too, he said, his voice as low as the wind through the trees. I knew Atson had a daughter, but her name never reached me. Camila slowly raised her eyes. The moonlight reflected on his face, revealing something she had never seen so clearly, restrained pain. Not for her, but for all that they had both lost, for a story that was never told. You never imagined, she whispered. I imagined. That's why I stayed quiet. That's why I never truly got close. If you were my sister, I preferred to keep my distance than risk hurting you with a feeling I couldn't control. Camila closed her eyes, because in that instant, she understood. Neuel loved her. In silence, with care, with patience, from the very first day. But he had held back for fear of his own blood, out of respect. And now, she asked, her voice cracking. Now that we know we're not, what do we do with all this? He didn't answer right away. He picked up a small stone from the ground, rolled it between his fingers, and then said, Now, you choose. Camila looked at him, at the man who accepted her when everyone else rejected her, who treated her with dignity when she only knew contempt, who hadn't touched her even while desiring her. You knew I was different, and still, you never looked away, she said quietly, almost to herself. Neuel nodded. And then, his eyes fixed on hers, he asked, Do you still want to run away? She felt a lump in her throat, but it wasn't from pain. It was from liberation. Camila took a step forward, then another. She placed her hands on his face, felt the texture of his skin, marked by the sun and by time. The warmth, the life, the silence that for the first time did not weigh but welcomed. No, she said. I don't want to run away anymore. And it was there, under the ancient mountain stars, that Camila placed her lips on his. A kiss without hurry, without fear. A kiss that was not of possession or urgency. It was a kiss of choice, of two souls who had been broken by stories that did not belong to them, but who now decided to write their own. When they parted, her eyes were still full of tears, but there was a light in them, a light that Neuel recognized. You are the flower that bloomed on the rock, he whispered. And she smiled, because now, finally, she understood that the beauty everyone denied her was not in the features of her face, but in the courage to remain standing. The news spread like wildfire. Camila Montemayor had returned. The town of San Dolores, with its narrow streets and even narrower eyes, stopped to watch. The women left their wash basins, the men fell silent on the terraces. Even the old church bell seemed to hesitate as it rang. But this was not the same Camila who had left. The woman who dismounted from the horse beside Neuel was no longer the downcast young girl in a dull dress and shrunken soul. She came with her head held high, her hair loose in the wind, braided with red ribbons. She wore a simple tunic of rustic linen, marked with hand-embroidered tribal designs. Her firm feet touched the ground like someone with roots and direction. And in her eyes, there was fire. Her sisters, Maria and Isabella, watched her from the balcony of the great house. They had the same golden shine as always, the elegant clothes, the rehearsed smiles. But seeing Camila, something in them broke. The beauty they had always used as a shield seemed empty. "Is that really her?" whispered Isabella. "It can't be," Maria replied. But it was. Camila approached her father's house. The old wooden door still creaked in the same way. Don Ezekiel appeared in the doorway, his hair whiter, his face drier, his eyes the same, cold. "Why have you returned?" he asked in a harsh voice. "Out of necessity," she replied firmly. "A sickness has reached part of the village. We have come to seek help, medicine, relief." The father crossed his arms. "And you think you have the right to ask for anything after having shamed us?" Camila smiled, but it was not a smile of fear. It was a response. "The only one who should feel shame here is the one who gave away his daughter as if she were a trade animal." A murmur crossed the crowd. The plaza was full, and no one had the courage to interrupt. Neuel remained silent behind her, not out of fear, but because this moment was hers. Camila looked around. She saw faces that once ignored her, now unable to look away. But it wasn't her external beauty that hypnotized them, it was the way she moved, how she spoke, how she breathed. She had become a presence. "I did not return to be accepted," she continued. "I returned because I became more than what you allowed me to be." Her sisters, in silence, lowered their gazes. Don Ezekiel took a step forward, trying to maintain control. "You are not a Montemayor by blood," he said, spitting out each word. "You never were." Camila approached slowly and calmly said, "Thank God." She then turned to the gathered townspeople and finished, "I no longer carry the name of a man who denied me. I carry the name my heart gave me. And today, he is the one by my side." She extended her hand to Neuel, and he took it without fear. It was the first time in her entire life that Camila felt completely seen, and more than that, respected. That day, the town saw something it never understood, that true beauty doesn't shine on the skin but beats in the courage of one who faces the past with dignity, and that the woman they once called ugly was now a light. The rising sun tinged the mountains surrounding the Apache village with gold. The sky, once reddish, was now a blanket of soft orange. The morning breeze carried the scent of burnt herbs, wildflowers, and damp earth. It was a day of ritual. Camila woke early. She dressed in a light tunic embroidered by her own hands with curved lines that imitated the flight of birds. In her hair, she braided seeds, feathers, and small copper charms. Each strand a symbol, each detail a step toward her new destiny. The women of the village awaited her in a circle around the great bonfire. Yara, now her soul sister, smiled tenderly and placed a small clay cup in Camila's hands. "Today, you are reborn," she said. Camila walked to the center of the circle, where the shaman awaited her with a necklace of red beads and a carved wooden staff. The silence around her was almost sacred. Even the ever-restless children sat quietly, their eyes wide open as if they knew this moment was larger than them. Neuel was there too, standing at the edge of the circle, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes fixed on her. But now, not as a guardian, but as a partner, an accomplice, a living witness to a metamorphosis. The shaman raised his hand, spreading fragrant smoke over Camila, and then spoke in a slow, hoarse voice, as if it carried 1,000 years. "Today, before our land, our ancestors, and the Great Spirit who sees all, we give a new name to she who arrived with pain, lived in silence, and now flourishes with honor." Camila felt her chest burn, not with fear, but with emotion. Everything that had been taken from her was now reorganizing itself within her. From this day on, the shaman continued, you will be called Itzaltea, which means, light on the rock. The sound of that name filled the air. It was distinct, strong, eternal. It didn't carry the weight of families who denied her or the label they imposed on her appearance. It was hers, chosen by her soul, applauded by the earth. Camila closed her eyes. She felt silent tears run down her cheeks, but not of pain, of gratitude. The necklace was placed on her neck, the staff given into her hands, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of wisdom and leadership. It was the rebirth of a woman who had already been everything, invisible, unwanted, negotiated, but who was now a guide. In the following days, Camila, now Itzaltea, began to teach in the village. She created a space where children learned to draw letters, count stars, and listen to stories. She united white and indigenous knowledge, sewing cultures together as she sewed fabrics, with care and respect. Men and women came to her for advice, not by imposition, but out of trust, because they saw in her a firmness without harshness, a voice without shouting, power without pride. And everyone called her by her new name. Neuel, now free to love without fear, rebuilt a house of stone and wood by her side. There, they planted flowers, kept books, and wrote new stories together. He never stopped being a warrior, but at her side, he discovered that loving was the greatest battle, and the most beautiful one. One night, under the same sky that had united them, Camila, or rather, Itzaltea, sat with Neuel at the door of their house. The wind moved the leaves, and the world seemed at peace. If you could go back to the day I was given away, she said in a serene voice, would you accept me again? Neuel smiled without hesitation. No. Because now, you were the one who chose to stay. And in that answer was the end of one cycle and the beginning of a new world. Years had passed since the day Camila, now Itzaltea, received her new name before the village. Wrinkles had gently touched the corners of her eyes, but the light in them was even stronger. The woman who was once called ugly, rejected, forgotten, was now a teacher of stories, a guide for the young, a symbol of strength and identity. It was the beginning of spring, and wildflowers once again covered the fields like embroideries of the earth. In the center of the village, a group of girls sat in a circle with attentive eyes, loose laughter, and hair tied back with colorful ribbons. In the center of the circle, a young woman of just over 30, with dark skin, long hair, and a gaze that mixed sweetness with firmness, opened an old book with a thick cover and yellowed pages. Today we are going to hear the story of a woman who was born a prisoner but became the queen of her own destiny, she said, smiling. The girls stirred, some lying back on the grass, others holding their friends' hands as if they already knew this story was special. The young narrator was named Neuel, the daughter of Camila, or rather, of Itzaltea. She turned the first page of the book, and there, written by hand in a firm and poetic script, was the title, The Daughter of the Earth and the Fire. They say she was ugly, Neuel began in a soft voice, that she had no sparkle in her eyes nor charm on her face. They say she was given in marriage out of shame. But what nobody knew was that she had a beauty the world could not see, because the world's eyes were blind. The girls sighed. One of them whispered, it sounds like a queen's story. Neuel continued, she was taken far away, to lands the white men feared. But there, among mountains and silence, she found someone who did not look with his eyes, he looked with his soul. And it was he who, without hurry, without demanding anything, helped her discover who she really was. She paused, looking around. But the most beautiful part, she said, her voice filled with emotion, is that she didn't wait to be saved. She rebuilt herself. She sewed her dignity with her own hands. She chose love. She chose to stay. And when everyone thought they knew her worth, she proved she was greater than any appearance. The girls were now completely silent. And do you know what happened? Neuel asked, smiling. She became a name in history, in the village, in respect. And her name is still whispered every time a girl believes she doesn't need to be pretty to be great. At the end of the reading, the girls applauded with soft claps, as one who respects something sacred. Neuel closed the book with affection and raised her gaze to the sky, where the sun was slowly setting, dyeing everything golden. In the distance, standing in the doorway of her house, Itzaltea watched the scene with a serene smile. Her hair was now gray, gathered in a high bun. Beside her, Neuel was braiding dry branches into a new wooden sculpture. The two didn't speak, they didn't need to. And around them, a new generation was growing, made of roots, of memory, of fire, and of forgiveness. Because Camila did not overcome in spite of the pain, she overcame because of it. And her story was not just hers, it was for all of them, for all the women who had ever felt invisible, rejected, silenced. For all those who learned that value is not in the mirror nor in the gaze of others, but in the flame that ignites even in the darkness.